start from your childhood. What's the first comic book that you remember reading? How did you discover comic book?
Yeah, I don't know if it was the first comic book I remember reading, but the comic book that kind of sparked the two comic books that sparked me becoming a fan were Grant Morrison's Justice League and Jack Kirby's New Gods. I loved the scale of them. There seemed to be more going on than just what was on the surface, even if I didn't understand it so much as a child. So that stuff really spoke to me a lot.
And how did you discover them? Were you reading?
Great question. My parents did not like me reading comic books. They wanted me to read real books. So what would happen was I would get my mother to drop me off at a bookstore called Barnes & Noble. And I would stay there for like 10 hours at a time. And I would just read the comics on their shelf. They had couches, so I would take the comics. So I would steal is the answer. I would steal them, but later I bought them many times, so I think it's okay. But yes, she would drop me off for like 10 hours, and I would read them there. And sometimes I would buy something there was a comic book shop. It was hard to get to. I would buy it, I would read it, and then I would have to give it away or throw it away because my parents didn't like me to bring them home.
But were something that you were enjoying, you share with other kids, or it was a solitary hobby?
Completely solitary. I didn't know anyone growing up who read comic books. It was just for me and my passion. And my parents they're not Americans. Not to say that you have to be an American, but it's kind of more Americans are familiar with it. Comics, at least superhero comics, which is what I was into. And so it was just me. It was a very solitary thing, but in time, especially doing work in comics, I've found an amazing community, and that has been really, really lovely. And the best part of making comics has been the people I found making them.
Right. And you actually then went to study biology and you went to medical school, but then you came back to comic book in a way as a profession. Your parents were happy that you went that road, or they would have preferred you doing science?
It's an understatement to say that they would have preferred me doing science. They were pretty pissed, and we didn't talk for a few years when I made the decision. But it was the decision that was right for me based off of I decided I didn't like the lifestyle. I lost somebody pretty close to me, and I was so busy that I couldn't see them before they passed, and that was really the thing that made me kind of decide I didn't want to do that as my profession anymore. So I took like maybe a year to kind of do nothing. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was living in New York with friends, and in time I started writing just to see if I could do it, and I entered a competition, a talent competition that Mark Miller was putting on, and I won, and so that was an indication, okay, like maybe you should keep trying, because I was still very bad, but there was some indication maybe that I could get better, and there was something there.
And but your scientific background was helpful in a way when you start writing comic books?
Yeah, it was very important and very helpful to have that kind of analytical. See, the thing about science is, the best advice I ever got about science was anybody can learn a technique. Anybody can learn a technique really well. If you want to do good science, the thing you have to develop is your ability to ask good questions. And that's the same thing that's true in the stories that I write. I don't have the answers, but I think I'm asking questions, and I learned the skill of asking good questions, how to formulate relevant questions, good questions, while I was doing in my science training. But even more than that, what's played into the writing was the time working in medicine, because I saw people in very difficult states, and very vulnerable moments in their life, and I saw how brave they could be even when they were so super scared, and how beautiful, when somebody was dying and their family would come, just how beautiful that could be, as well as how tragic. And so just seeing people in that condition, refugees from Syria, and they'd lost everyone that they knew, but they were rebuilding their life from scratch, and they were happier and more enthusiastic and than I was, about life. So it was that really. I think that was more of an influence even than the science studying.
You work in a fishing village on the coast of Ecuador,
yes,
in Buenos Aires and in Istanbul, and then, as you were mentioning, you went to New York, not knowing anybody, not having a steady job, just wanted to become a comic book artist.
Yeah, I actually had one friend from medical school who
Okay.
was going to, who's doing his residency in New York. So
Okay.
I didn't know anyone else, but I knew this one guy. He was a very close friend, and he's from New York, and so we were, and then he had his friend group from New York, who they'd known each other since they were like 5 years old, and they kind of adopted me into their friend group, and so it was an incredible experience. I mean, I loved New York, and I had a very unique experience in that I had like a group of friends almost ready-made, but I didn't know them well before except for my one friend. Yeah.
What motivates you to do such a great leap and abandon everything and try the comic book career?
Yeah, as I said before, it was a very close friend of mine. My friend since we were kindergarten passed away from suicide, and he had tried to call me a few times before, in the week before, and I was so busy with medical stuff that I didn't pick up, and so that really sent me on a little bit of a tailspin for a while of not really. I really resented medicine for that, I think, and resented myself as well, and so I really had to step away. The going abroad and all that stuff was actually I was trying to find a way to do medicine in a way that I would that I could still enjoy, and I couldn't find it. So I decided to leave and to not. I didn't decide to go to comics. I just decided to leave and figure something else out. Like a lot of people who go to New York
Right.
come with not sure what they want to do, and I was a little bit older than most, but I decided to leave it all, and it was great. It was the best thing I've ever. I mean, it was a terrible thing that prompted it, but it was the right decision, and I'm happier than ever now. So, but it was certainly scary, and my parents were not happy about it, especially.
Right. And you mentioned the fact that you started on a Mark Miller project, the contest, and you wrote a 5-page story about Starlight, if I am correct.
Correct.
And
Done your research.
Yeah. What was the process in doing that first story? How did you do that? Because I guess you had no formal training in writing.
Yeah, no formal training in writing or in comics writing, especially. But I always was. Since I was young, I loved to take them apart. I mean, that's part of the science thing is, take things apart and see how they work. And so I was always analyzing comics for myself, just for fun. And then sometimes I would do like annotations, again, just for fun, especially Grant Morrison's comics, to see how they worked and why did I like them so much and what they were doing and all this. They had this incredible complexity. How did they do that? You naturally, when you see something, you want to take it apart a little bit to see how it works, And so I was doing that before, and I decided, so I wouldn't say I was good at writing or anything like that, but I had been thinking about it in those terms for a while. So then it's not so far to say, okay, I can analyze it, break it down. Can I build it up from nothing, And so when I look at something like Starlight, it was a simple thing of, well, what's Starlight about? Deeply, what is it about? It's about a guy who loves his wife. It's about a guy who loves his family. So the story became about that. But he also has these great adventures. So it became, it's easy enough once you figure that out.
Moving forward to Absolute Martian Manhunter, Scott Snyder said that the origin of that project was that he actually was welcoming unsolicited pitch about what you could do with the Absolute line.
Scott called me one day and he said, listen, I'm doing this Absolute thing. The first 5 characters are taken, the big 5 characters are taken. You can do anything you want. We would love for you to do something. Will you pitch something? And I said, sure. I picked Absolute Martian Manhunter because I thought he was a big character, honestly. To me, he was one of the main big 7 of the Justice League. Everybody always asks me that. Why Martian Manhunter? Why did you pick Martian Manhunter? Why not Martian Manhunter? He's a super interesting character, I thought, with I wanted to. There was a lot of things that I wanted to talk about. It was less about maybe Martian Manhunter and more about the kinds of things that I wanted to talk about people, about humanity, about the way we think, about consciousness, about free will. And so I had all these ideas for that, and I thought Martian Manhunter would be an interesting way interesting way to those topics. And I've always thought that the character was super interesting. I actually really liked a lot of the previous runs, John Ostrander and all these other characters. Mm-hmm. But it was also about my other interests. While I did read all the original Martian Manhunter stuff, and I've read a lot of the previous runs just as a fan, what I was mostly, inspired by or drawing from was my real life or the stuff that I was interested in the real world.
I was wondering, for you as a writer, knowing that much of the character, is it helpful or doing with a fresh eye
it's
from
both.
the start?
You need to have both. So I think to be a creator is to not be in love with what a character is, but what a character could be. So that's the most important thing. If I like the characters that I love the most, like the New Gods, that Jack Kirby did, I almost couldn't write them because I'm so in love with what was done before, and I think that can be a problem in comics where people are so in love with what came before that they're just doing kind of a similar version of that. I think you have to have a fresh perspective, try to do something new, but also you should do the research because there's also years and years of very good writers and very smart people working on these characters and contributing their ideas, and so I find myself inspired by various things. When I go back and read, I can be inspired by those things, but they're the smallest part of the work. You know what I mean? The biggest part is the stuff that I bring to it from outside sources and from my own life experience and stuff like that. Yes, but again, that the old continuity. It's not to say that it's bad. It's helpful, but it's a well of creativity that you can draw from, a well of inspiration that you can draw from. It shouldn't be, I think, in my opinion, the main inspiration. I think that's maybe one of the problems of comics is it can be a little too insular. It's just, you're writing, you risk it's fans writing for other fans, but our goal is, Javi and I talk about this a lot, our goal is to write for fans, yes, and then also for people who have never read a DC comic, people who have never read a comic at all, and to do that you have to have a kind of a fresh eye on it, I think.
Right, and the other work, your other series that is here in Napoli, Assorted Crisis Events, it sort of speak about our current time. We live in a perennial assorted crisis event. Yeah. I don't know, what was the inspiration for that book?
I came up with that during the pandemic, and I was looking for a way to talk about what felt like a series of unending crises, maybe not even a series, a crisis upon crisis upon crisis. You had environmental crisis, political crisis, you had the pandemic, crisis, and all of them kind of interacting with each other. And it seemed to me that it was never ending, and that time was compressing and moving fast and also taking forever. And so I wanted to create something that allowed me to talk about those things, to talk about the things that I was going through, to talk about the things that my friends were going through, to the things that we saw in the news that hurt us so much. And so all of the Assorted Crisis Events issues are really, really personal to me. They all are something that either happened to me or happened to somebody that I know. Not obviously time breaking down, but in some, using the metaphor of time, but it's all very personal stuff. Those are very personal stories that I've been drawing a lot from life for those ones, and in general, I think I've been trying to do that in my work, is to make everything as personal as I can make it. Not because it's about me or anything like that, but because if I do that, then I can make it very specific, and if I make it very specific, I think people respond to that more. Somehow in the specific you can find the universal.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely.